So I'm excited to see what you have to say about this.
I'm giving it an F because I don't think anyone should do this exercise. Coach Greg, and I'm here with Eric Janicki. I said his name right. We're going over the best exercises to do for your body parts. We're giving them A, B, C, D, or F ratings. And so stay tuned. We are going to have different opinions. Am I right? Is he right? We'll let you decide. You ready?
Let's do this.
Let's get started.
Number one exercise we are going to grade is the barbell seated military press.
Barbell seated military press. I'm going with a B rating. I think it's good exercise. I don't think it's a great exercise. I don't enjoy it as much. I don't know how safe it is to do. It's not the easiest thing to get under. I don't really have that much to add to this one. I don't do it personally. If somebody wanted to do it, I'd say go ahead. But I mean, it's working the delts, but I think there's better exercises.
I am going to grade the barbell seated military press a C- for bodybuilding purposes.
Pretty low.
Pretty low, yeah. And I actually have some reasons for this. Number one is just like we're talking motor recruitment and hypertrophic effect as compared to risk factor. And it's just pretty high here, the risk factor, because we are trying to probably put maximal loads overhead in a seated position with a barbell. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. The other thing I've mentioned, the same thing about the bench press, barbell bench press, it's controlling your angle of your hands, or your elbow by the positioning of your pinky. So your elbow is going to track your pinky inevitably. So if you're here, it's bowing the elbows out. It's putting a lot of pressure on that front delt, that bicep insertion. So I would prefer seeing you guys do like a more of a hammer strength press or even a Smith machine press because you're going to get a lot more control. That being said, I will stand by this. I don't think presses are going to be your biggest bang for buck when it comes to building your delts because there's a lot of other muscles you can incorporate and recruit in a pressing motion as opposed to raising motion where you're going to get a lot more delt isolation and get more of that capped look.
Now, we mentioned a safety profile. Do you think it's safer to do them seated because obviously you're going to have lighter weight than standing, or do you think standing is safer? Now, me personally, I'd rather do it standing than seated. But I'm actually lifting more weight standing. But when I'm seated in place, something feels off. It feels like my back is not stable. I don't feel very good in that position. So what are your opinion on that?
Yeah, so in the top position, there's going to be a lot of spinal loading and also loading and also through the neck because in that top position, that stacked position, when you're seated, you're basically pressed down against that pad and that's going to provide a lot of force directly down through the spine. The other thing worth mentioning is like you can ergonomically move with the movement pattern when standing because you naturally are going to actually stick the head through on a barbell press, like an Olympic lifter. You'll see that when they snap, like clean and jerk on the jerk, they're not going to press like back here. They're going to stick their head through because ergonomically that's going to be proper because you're going to have that weight stacked over your body. So I think that's why standing a lot of times you can move a little bit more ergonomically. It's going to put a little less pressure on your spine because you're not sitting and that butt and that base of your spine is not planted on the seat. Let's go to a dumbbell lateral raise.
An A plus. Dumbbell lateral raise, to me, it's a must exercise. For me, I love this exercise. I can do it all day long. I don't overtrain from it. It doesn't hurt. Even when I have a bad shoulder, I can do these exercises. It hits more the medial delt, giving that width. Much better than, for example, a front raise. You don't need to overdevelop this. And so that is a staple in my delt exercise. If there was one exercise I'm doing, I only had one time to do it, that's the one I'm doing.
I think I'm going to give the dumbbell lateral raise an A as well for medial delt development, just because of that fact that it's very low risk profile, especially when done correctly. Sure, you can take the 50s, 60s, 70s and swing them around. What I would do to maximize your delt raise is actually get a slight elbow bend and a little bit of a front rotation with basically rolling the shoulders forward. That's going to allow to keep it more in the delt and out of the trap. A lot of times I see people with overdeveloped traps because they were actually doing their lateral raises using a lot more of their trapezius muscle right here and more your neck as opposed to your delt. So really focus on lightening up the weight and getting a really good negative, which will help you actually think, okay, am I really connecting with my medial delt or am I just swinging this using both momentum and more traps? So when done correctly, I think for building up your delts, it's a great exercise for beginners, intermediate, advanced. Use some more tempo, time, or attention. I'm giving this exercise an A.
Standing or seated lateral raises?
I think you can go with both. Standing provides the advantage of a little bit more of that ergonomic body movement. So you could probably start a little more forward and then like lift up at the top of the rep to get that max development through the delt. You can do that same thing kind of seated though, kind of like here using that kind of like slight rocking. I don't think there's any better or worse. I think it's just kind of a matter of preference.
I prefer the standing myself because I like to do these reps with very strict form at the start. And then as you do it faster, a little bit of cheating at the end so you can go past failure. If I'm doing them seated, I'm going for really strict form. But standing, I can kind of like allow my body English to add to it a little bit.
Yeah, you could probably use a little bit of momentum for the kind of past failure. I do think you could, I would argue that you could probably do those. I do that seated as well. So at the end of my set here, even if I'm seated, I can get a little bit almost like wrapping that underneath the leg and getting that extra stretch to the delt and then firing through some failure reps here. So I think it's possible to do it with both seated and standing. Next one, we have a dumbbell front raise. So I'm excited to see what you have to say about this.
I'm giving it an F because I don't think anyone should do this exercise. The front delt is already overdeveloped. Almost everyone, well, except perhaps you, is bench pressing all the time. They're overdeveloping their front delts. You don't need any extra development there. I think that if you have only 5 sets or 5 exercises or an hour in the gym, I wouldn't waste it on developing the front delt. I'd rather you hit the rear delt. That's usually what's underdeveloped on a body. Almost everyone is overdeveloped here. Everyone knows they have to focus on here, and most people don't work the back nearly as much. So I would skip out on the front delt. I wouldn't do it at all and choose something else.
I'm going to rate the dumbbell front raise as actually a B minus. Not for the reason that it's a dangerous exercise or you can't build up your front delt. But I think for that very reason, the front delt is very heavily hit when you do your chest exercises, when you do your pressing movements, overhead even, you're going to hit a lot of front delt inevitably. So I think when you do too much front delt, first of all, it's not going to build that kind of aesthetic flow of that kind of capped delt. So I'd really focus more on that rear delt, medial delt exercises when we're talking about isolation movements and raises. And also I think that there are better front raising movements. I think like a rope cable front raise is going to be a much better movement pattern for front delt specifically. I think the cables in general, I think are going to trump dumbbells just for a lot of reasons. But for that reason, I'm going to go with a B minus. Mm-hmm. Cable lateral raises.
Do I like it more or less or the same? I'm going to give it the same exact rating. I think it's a great exercise. I personally don't do it as much. I find that it's just the ease of access where it's the dumbbells there. I can always grab a dumbbell, whether I'm using either a 25 or 30 or 35, depending on how I feel. If I have to go into a cable machine, it's usually occupied for just ease of use, for how hard it is to get access. For me, I do my exercises in basically a circuit, so I just kind of throw myself in there whenever and grab a dumbbell. It's a lot more work to get into the cables, more adjustments, and so for ease of use, I'm going to say the dumbbell just a little bit better for me, but they're both great exercises to do.
I'm going to give cable lateral raise an A+ for delts. There's a lot of reasons for this. I think that the vector of force is going to be the number one for me because when you can do, let's say, a behind the back or a cross body where that vector of force actually coming across. So at the bottom of your rep, realistically with the dumbbell, you have no tension on the delt because that vector of force, gravity through the floor, pulling your shoulder straight down. Now, if you're taking that cable behind you and that vector of force is coming from across, you still have tension on your delt on the bottom of that rep. So from here, I have constant tension. Even when I get to the bottom, if let's say that cable's behind me or even in front of me, I'm still under tension. So let's say if I'm doing a crossover lateral raise, it's coming from across my body. So that vector of force is very important. And I think that constant tension, even at the bottom of the rep in the most stretched position, because I think that for delts, that's slept on a lot because people talk about stretch medial hypertrophy for quads, for lats, but I think with delts, even when you go across the body, you get that really nice stretch through that medial delt under load. I think that you can get a lot of extra hypertrophy and just keep the tissue safer over time. And also with a cable, I think there's a lot more selectorization with the behind the back for in front of you, different angles. You can even use a cuff. You can even like buy one of those kind of things that go around your wrist and race. You don't have to worry about your grip at all or any of it going through your hands. So for that reason, A+.
Yeah, he makes a great argument as to why it's better. You can definitely see that during a stretch position, you can have load on the muscle the entire range of motion versus with the dumbbell, you really only feel it kind of like 6 inches away from the side and up to the top. And so it's a little bit harder to get the full feel of it. Cable, you're guaranteed to do it. For me, I guess it's just the fact it's harder to get to, and it's usually further away from the mirror, and I can't check myself out.
That's
if I'm going to be honest too.
Very important.
And yeah,
it's almost the most important thing. So I might have to grade this now.
We're rating exercise effectiveness on how good you look while doing this.
Yeah. So I think that's another point. But I think also last thing I'll say about this, like it really takes the ego out of it. Like I don't think I ever seen somebody care about how much they cable lateral raise. We're still with dumbbell lateral raises. I still get people who are like, oh yeah, well I do the dumbbell laterals with my like 50s, dude. So my delts are pretty developed. I'm like, no, I'm looking at your delts. They're not developed at all. But I don't care that you're swinging 50s around. I'm literally looking at your shoulders being underdeveloped and probably one of your weaker muscle groups. So I think there is still a attribution of how much weight can you delt raise laterally as like kind of an ego thing, and like we said, correlation is not causation. So there's a difference between those two. So even though you can maybe delt raise 50s with terrible form, doesn't mean your delts are getting developed or that they're even strong. You're probably just using a lot of momentum and shit form and compensating and thinking that you're growing your delts. So I think that the cable takes that out of it completely. Nobody cares about how much your cable delt raising. So you could probably keep your ego out of it and use like maybe even a moderate weight of 10 to 15, maybe even 20 and get a really good stretch and really good pump. Let's do cable Y raises.
Cable Y raises. I don't even know what that is. Cable Y raise.
So cable Y raise is essentially you can use it either on an incline bench or you can just do it standing. You're going to go crossover grip and you're going to do levels like the YMCA. So you're going to come across and raise here. So it's kind of an in-between between a true, let's say, lateral raise and a true front raise. It's kind of right in between. And so I'm going to...
I mean, I've never specifically done this exercise, but just based on what he's describing, I have to give it at least a B+. It sounds better than many of the exercises people are doing. I can't see why you wouldn't want to do it. It's going to have constant tension. You're starting with a good stretch. Feel it the entire way. And so, I don't know, B+. I haven't tried. I don't know. I can't speak really if I haven't felt it.
I'm giving the cable Y raise an A+. And the specific reasoning for this is because it allows for a lot of engagement of the medial and rear delt in a way that isn't as taxing on the joint. And I've had a lot of people and clients and people I've worked with try this exercise and that can't do lateral raises. Like they're like, oh, lateral raises are no go for me. They'll try the Y raise. They're like, oh, you know what? This actually, oh man, like this burns, like this feels really good. And so I think that it's that unique angle of not being in that strict lateral, especially if you have any impingement, rotator cuff issues, labrum tears, any type of like, let's say degradation of the joint or anything to do with cartilage degradation. Like it's harder to do a lot of things in that strict lateral. So this Y raise provides you the ability to still get a really great pump contraction in that medial and rear delt without having to do that true strict lateral movement.
I have to give this one a try. It's like we said earlier, if you've never tried it, how do you know you like it?
My favorite is probably setting up on those narrow cables we were working on yesterday for chest.
Yeah.
You can either do them standing or set up an incline bench so that vector force is perfectly back here. And then you just get that perfect angle here and then raise to about there. Slow.
Pause or no pause?
Pause.
I feel like Yeah,
pause there. And then go all the way down, crossover stretch, and then dig back into it. It's amazing.
I have to give it a try.
Let's finish out with a barbell upright row.
Jeff Cavalier would have to give it an F. I'm going to give it I'm gonna have to give it a C rating. I'm not gonna give it a fail. I did this for years when I was growing up. I liked it. I made sure I did it with a wider grip, although it can cause injuries. For me, it never was a problem. It still has its place. I like the exercise. It feels good. It looks good too, which is important for some people. But overall, I think there's much better exercises. Again, I don't want to develop the front delt too much. There's no real point. I do it a slight lean, pulling it back, trying to get some rear delts. So I'm going to give it a C. I'm not going to make it fail. It still has its place for some people.
Yeah, I'm going to give the barbell upright row for delt development a C as well. I think that it's not a terrible exercise, but let's get back into the mechanics of these type of exercises. With this, we are trying to maximize delt engagement. With the barbell, it's holding our hands in one single plane. We can't turn the hands in any capacity. When we come here, a lot of times people will take over with their with more of their traps, just because the barbell disallows from any type of movement. What I would recommend is using a cable with a rope attachment or even handles, so you can actually internally rotate the thumbs down, pinkies up, which allows us to pull here and raise here, which is going to allow us to keep the shoulders down, not shrugged, and pull more out and up and drive the elbows up, which is going to get more medial and rear delt engagement as opposed to traps. That's my recommendation. That exercise for me is more like an A. So that's why with the barbell upright row, it's less controlled. You're also getting pulled forward because that bar is in front of you, so it's harder to get a negative, which obviously I think is one of the keys of any type of hypertrophy focused movement pattern, is to have a really good eccentric portion of the movement. So if you can't hold the eccentric because you're getting pulled forward by the weight being in front of you, whereas with a cable, let's say rope raise, you can actually do these seated, you can do them lying back and not worry about getting kind of pulled forward by that weight.
All right, hope you learned something. And don't forget, please go subscribe to Eric Janicki. You can follow him on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. He's hilarious, highly intelligent. Look at the size of this guy. So please go and check him out. Got to get him over 1 million followers. Check it out. Subscribe right now.